New England is essentially the oldest place in America. The first place is discovered, the first place is settled, with history going back 400 years. So it lends itself to having a lot more stories, a lot more history, a lot more creepy, unusual urban legends, folklore. I try to parcel out these stories, the creepy, supernatural, or folklore type, because I don't want all of New England history and the New England stories to be like everything was creepy all the time. But this was the one I thought you might enjoy. This is the legend of how a creeping vine seemed to predict the deaths of family members in a small town called Dummerston, Vermont. This is the Dummerston Vine cemetery story. When researching the podcast and looking for topics that I think would be interesting to share with people, I have a few go-to sites to discover things I might not have known about. One such site is atlasobscura.com. They're a haven for cool and creepy and unusual stories from different states. And that's where I found the story of the Dummerston Vine. First, a little bit about Dummerston, Vermont. So the town itself is less than 10 miles north of Brattleboro, Vermont, which itself is only 10 miles north of the Massachusetts border, to kind of give you a little bit of a reference of where it is. It's a very small town. Population is just over 1,700. And this cemetery we're going to talk about, Dummerston Center Cemetery, is located at 914 East West Road in East Dummerston, if you want to go there. In doing the research for this, I got a lot of these facts from the New England Grimpendium book written by J.W. Ocker. So if you want to go check it out and get the book, there's a lot more stories. But as far as the Dummerston Vine goes, the story goes back about 200 years, and it has to deal with members of the Spaulding family who started dying at unusually young ages and with relative regularity. And this was from a strange illness that seemed to suck the blood right from them. And naturally, if you've ever researched old folklore from New England from the 19th century and before, you'll know that there were stories about vampires sucking the blood. But what it turned out to be was tuberculosis, which kind of doubled as vampirism. There's a story of a woman named Mercy Brown who was seen as a vampire in Rhode Island. That's going to be something I'll tell in the podcast later, probably in October. Needless to say, these vampire stories from 150 plus years ago were not that uncommon. The twist with this story has to do with a vine, a creeping vine in the cemetery. Basically what happened was in this Dummerston Center Cemetery, there was a Spaulding family had a family plot. And as a family member would die, things became more suspicious. So eventually they went to the cemetery due to superstition to see what was up, and they found this creeping vine. And basically their superstition was every time the vine touched the coffin of a recently deceased member of the Spaulding family, another one would die. There is a row of 6 graves, which are the Spaulding children. The parents are Lieutenant Leonard Spaulding and his wife. They're buried in separate unmarked graves. But the children, I'm assuming, are the ones where the vine was creeping along. And this cemetery is easy to access, and I believe the Spaulding graves are kind of in the middle of the cemetery on a hill. When researching the graves, there's one son named Josiah. All the rest, I guess, you can't really tell who they are. The story is that after a few of these children passed away from vampirism or tuberculosis, they went up, they dug up the most recent deceased member, and they found the vine and destroyed it, burned it, hacked it to bits to stop the vine from claiming another member of the Spaulding family. The legend kind of grew from there, but as you get into the actual details of it, it's written in the New England Grimpendium book that the children, their graves are not in chronological order, so it wasn't like the vine touched one and then the next one died and you buried that child. So it kind of doesn't lend credence to it. But what did you expect? Did you really think there was a supernatural vine that killed these children? Unfortunately, it ends up being just a sad story of a a family that lost their children all basically to tuberculosis, and the superstition that came that it couldn't have just been tuberculosis raiding this family. It had to be something else, and that's where the fault lies with a creeping vine. So there was no curse on the Spaulding family. The Dummerston Vine was just a coincidence, but it is a cool, creepy folklore story with some reality. I mean, they did dig up the body of the last child and burn it and destroy the vine. So, I mean, that's true. So I guess sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. Like I said, though, check out the New England Grimpendium book. Grimpendium is an odd word, but there aren't too many with the same name. But it's got a lot of interesting stories in it. Check out atlasobscura.com, and I'm going to have a lot more stories like this, the weird, macabre, and just plain unusual and odd stories that seem to dot New England throughout its 400-year history. And if you're feeling up to it, go and check out the Dummerston Center Cemetery and get creeped out because, hey, you never know. The book and common sense says that it wasn't a vine and it was just tuberculosis, but it could have been vampires, it could have been a curse. You just never know.